see, I have travelled all the way to Egypt to bring you our next story today. Egypt is very different from where we live. Well, first of all, it's really very warm. And secondly, there is sand everywhere. I'm going to tell you about a couple in Egypt. They lived many, many years ago, and their story is found in God's special book, the Bible. Wait till you hear their names. The mummy, her name is Jochebed. And the daddy, his name is Amram. What strange names indeed. But boys and girls, they were very excited. Do you know why? Because they were going to have another little baby. And this was great news. Even though they had a boy and a girl, they were going to have another baby. But this was a problem. A big problem. Why? Because of this man. This is Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the king of Egypt, and he is not a nice king. He's a very cruel man. Because Pharaoh had just wrote a new law. All new Israelite baby boys had to be thrown into the River Nile. What an awful law, and why such a cruel law? We see at that time there were two sets of people living in the land of Egypt. First set were the Egyptians, obviously, but the second set of people were God's people, the Israelite people. And as they grew in number, Pharaoh didn't like this, and he was worried that the Israelite people would turn on the Egyptian people and that he would lose his whole kingdom. So that's why he made that terrible new rule. It wasn't a very nice thing to do, sure it wasn't. It's not nice to treat people in a wrong way, but yet we've all done it. A nasty word, an awful thought. And the Bible calls this sin. And sin is serious because it separates us from God. Jesus said we are to treat others the way that we would expect them to treat us. Pharaoh wasn't treating the Israelites in a right way. But the time had come for this little baby to be born. I wonder, is it going to be a boy or a girl? Let's find out. It's a boy. But what were they going to do? If Pharaoh found this little boy, he would be thrown into the River Nile. But God had a plan for this little boy. Amram and Jochebed were able to hide him for 3 months. And I'm sure that was hard as well, because little babies cry. But what were they now going to do? Well, God gave them another idea. And it tells us in the book of Exodus what it was. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with tar and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. Jochebed was trusting God to save her little baby, but it must have been so hard to watch him go along the river. The wonderful thing is that God cared about this little baby. Yes, God is mighty and powerful, but yet he's also full of love and he cares about you. You see, many years later, another little baby was born, and this little baby was laid in a manger. Do you know who it was? It was God's only Son, the Lord Jesus. And because God loved the world so much, he sent his only begotten Son into the world to live and one day die for all the sin that we have ever done. 3 days later, the Lord Jesus came back to life again. And that's why we need to put our trust in him. He can take away all of our sin. The little baby is in the basket, floating down the River Nile. His older sister Miriam, she was watching from the bulrushes just to make sure that he was okay. But then something happened. What was that? It's the Pharaoh's daughter, the princess. Oh no, what's going to happen now? The princess seen the basket and naturally went to open it up. And there inside was the little baby crying. Miriam jumped up out of the bulrushes and ran over, really very brave. And she said to the princess, do you want me to go and find a nurse for this little baby? And the princess said something very strange. See, she said, go. Wow. So let's get this right. The Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, wants to look after the Israelite baby, which really should have been killed. But yet God was making sure that this little baby was kept safe. Miriam ran back to her mother. She brought Jochebed back to the princess. And she said, will you look after this little baby? I will pay you. And when the time is right, bring him back to me in the palace, and I will take him. God had in fact saved this little baby. And you never believe it, but Jochebed got to take this little baby home, and she was allowed to look after him. She even got paid. Doesn't God really work everything out? Boys and girls, He does that in our lives. He works everything out. And even the times when we're worried or we are afraid of what may happen, we still need to trust in God, because He will always look after us. Have you trusted in Him today? Have you told Him that you're sorry for the sin in your life? And have you asked Him to come into your life and take it all away? And in every day, put Him number one, and He'll help you. Who would have believed that Jochebed was getting to look after her own little baby? But another time came when the baby was a wee bit older, and she took him back to the palace. And she named the baby Moses, which means drawn out of the water. And Moses was then brought up in the Egyptian palace. Why? Because that's exactly where God wanted him to be. Moses was exactly where God had him. Do you know why? Because many years later, whenever he grew up, God was going to use him to bring the Israelite people out of Egypt and to stop them from being slaves. God is great. God is wonderful. We have learnt this morning how little Moses, he survived because God had a great plan for him. And God has a great plan for you too, if you know Him in that very special way. Thank you for listening so well, boys and girls, to our lesson today. I have some quiz questions. I wonder, can you get them right? Here's question number 1. Why were the mummy and daddy really excited at the start of our story today? They were going to have a baby, that's right. But what awful law did Pharaoh have? He was going to put all the new baby Israelite boys into the River Nile, that's right. Can you remember what the baby was called? Of course, it was Moses. What did the mummy Jochebed do to hide little Moses? She put him in a basket, that's right. But who found the baby? It was the princess, the Pharaoh's daughter. And here's one last question. Who looked after Moses until he was handed over to the palace? It was in fact his mummy. Brilliant. I hope you got those all right. Bye for now.